Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be starting a two-part series on a little known location in southeastern North Carolina. Today it's known as Fort Anderson. Back in the time that we're going to be talking about it, today it was simply known as Brunswick Town. And today, of course, we do have Brunswick County. Um, and Chris, this is sort of the perfect example of history you didn't know but should, because there are a lot of people that don't know the history of Brunswick Town and later Fort Anderson and the important role it played both in southeastern North Carolina in the Revolutionary War, but also in the Civil War.
And I think that's what is fascinating is that you do have this place that does traverse all throughout the time of history in which there is a key moment that takes place during that, as you say, American Revolution, but then also during the Civil War. And it's one of those rare finds. You look at Jamestown. Jamestown is known for this specific event in history. You look at Gettysburg, it's known for that specific moment in history. But yet here you have two moments in history in a small, quaint little area that many people will ride by and don't even really know the history that is involved there, but not just the history of the American Revolution or of the Civil War, but also that this is a place that was inhabited by the natives. That this is kind of where it all started was the natives who were around this area and then get involved in even something before the American Revolution, which was like a Native American war, if you will. And so a lot of history in a very small, centralized location there in Southeast North Carolina.
Yeah, that's goes. You mentioned there the conflict with Native Americans in southeastern North Carolina, but of course you had conflicts throughout what later would become North Carolina. Um, and it is one of the things that I talk about with my students in my classes, and that is that the natives had the land, the Europeans and later the Americans wanted it. And as more and more Europeans come in, as more and more Americans begin pushing west later on, they're constantly coming into conflict. And we see that story, that tension between the natives who have been there for thousands of years potentially between them and these Europeans coming in saying, "Yeah, we want this land now," and not always willing, Chris, to bargain for it or pay for it in the in a fair way.
And I think it's interesting to just really think through, how do I say this? That you basically have this land. I mean, and at one point it was trees, it was
Yep.
dirt. I mean, there was no large seafaring area, there was no, buildings and things. It was just land. But people took what was of the land and realized what they could do, and that's how Brunswick Town, later Anderson, really becomes successful is because the land produced so many products that could then be exported to, especially to England, which would
Mhm.
allow them. We're known in this part of North Carolina for pine trees. We've got pine trees everywhere, and of course, you can go just about through any house, and you'll see pine straw that will cover the fronts of the yard with the bushes
Makes
and flowers.
makes wonderful homes for snakes.
Yes, yes, and they enjoy the going underneath,
And
which is
that's why I don't have pine straw in my yard.
right.
So I've
And
experienced moving that stuff, and there is a little, 8-inch long worm, i.e., a snake, a rattlesnake, a copperhead, whatever. And it's like, no, I'm not interested.
Yeah, and so the longleaf pine is one of the most well known of the pine trees that's here. And what happened is they started taking that longleaf pine and then from the tar from the trees and the turpentine and all of that began to be sent to England where the Navy used it. And so you have all of a sudden people saying this is a trading area, and in order to trade and in order to have a business, then you have to have a shop, you have to have a home, you have to have businesses. And that is how Brunswick Town basically gets established. And it's interesting that from just a piece of land with pine trees, all of a sudden you will find that this place will become central to the American Revolution, to the Civil War, but also crucial to the development of, you mentioned Brunswick County, New Hanover County, but that this will actually become one of the first capitals, if you will, of eventually the state of North Carolina, all because of some pine trees.
Yeah, and not just the pine trees, but where it's located. If you go to Brunswick Town or Fort Anderson today, it is right there on the banks of the Cape Fear River. And that Cape Fear River spills out or is fed by the Atlantic Ocean. So ships could go from the Atlantic Ocean into the Cape Fear and eventually make it not that far down to Brunswick Town. And the guy who sort of put this original town together in 1726 was a guy called Morris Moore. Now, Moore is the son of a former South Carolina governor, and he's the one that I guess saw the potential here and put Brunswick Town together, and eventually, it began, doing the trade because of the pine trees and also its location. But as you said there at the end there, Chris, it does become sort of a capital of colonial North Carolina, specifically royal North Carolina. So you have royal governors who are here in Brunswick Town. You've got two of them specifically. A guy called Arthur Dobbs, who, by the way, is buried there, and also William Tryon, who, of course, is more known for Tryon Palace up in New Bern. But this is where both of these guys spend their time as royal governors of the colony of North Carolina, and they use a building, a house there called Russellboro, and it was both their residence and the Capitol building while they were there in Russell. I mean, excuse me, in Brunswick Town. So it sort of becomes a de facto, if not official, capital of the colony of North Carolina during the 1700s because this is where the governors, the royal governors, are staying.
And I find it interesting when you start thinking about, let's take Russellboro, because Russellboro being the house that you mentioned, it's named by after Captain John Russell, right? So I get that. That makes sense. What surprised me is that we're calling this place Brunswick Town. We're not calling it Moortown. I mean, and I'll just be honest, if I was the guy that kind of founded this place, I would have called it Carrolltown. I would have called it Moortown. I'm going to put my name on it, so it'd be something. But and I don't know the true history of how Brunswick Town came to be called Brunswick. I did some research and it was talking about it's named after some German holding by
Yeah,
King George, and
yeah.
and you just start thinking through that. It's like, what was he thinking? Because honestly, how many people know about Colonel Maurice Moore? Nobody knows about him. Nobody pays attention to him. Now they know all about Brunswick Town. They know about his history. They know about, I mean, there's so much there. And you know about the Russellboro house. So Russellboro was evidently a little smarter than Moore because he wanted to put his name on it. So I just find that interesting that we name all of these things just these weird, obscure names. And now everybody has Brunswick County, the Port of Brunswick, all of these things, which kind of goes back to some German holding that nobody knows about. Just a random thought that I had about that.
Yeah, George the First was king at this point. Now, during the Revolutionary War, you got George the Third, but George the First is king of England at this particular point in time. But he's also the Duke of Brunswick in what is now Germany, and so they name it Brunswick Town. I guess maybe trying to get favor with the king. I mean, if you're Jamestown, you're naming it after King James the First, who's sitting over in the castles in England. Um, and
Raleigh.
Virginia, of course, is Elizabeth the First, which I get why they named it Virginia because she was the Virgin Queen, but still, I get your point that it's like, well, why don't we put the name of the people? Why didn't they put the name of the people who actually founded it or started it on the colony?
Yeah, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. He decided that he wanted to do what he wanted to do, but then, one of the other things is that they realized that because of its central location, and with the exporting and with the trading and things of that nature, it's closer to the water, Cape Fear River. Well, you also understand that during this time period, there is this global competition for supremacy, and that basically who has the most toys wins, or he who has the most land wins. And so you start to see the French and the Spanish and the English all competing for this new age, this new world, where we are as far as what will later be known as the United States. And so there's competition that's going. And so this area says, well, if we're going to be exporting, we're going to be having all of these things, we possibly need to have some sort of structure, some sort of defense place that will allow us the opportunity to protect those individuals that come. I mean, they'd already talked about the war with the natives, and so that leads to the construction of Fort Anderson, and really. Um, that's a pretty fascinating feat that takes place as Fort Anderson starts to be constructed and the impact that it will have in future events.
Yeah, and it's quite an impressive. I know we'll talk about it more in our later in the next episode when we talk about Fort Anderson itself, effectively during the Civil War. But if you've ever been there, if any of our listeners have ever been to Fort Anderson, the historical location down there in Brunswick County, it's an impressive location. I mean, just simply its geographical location, where it is situated there on the Cape Fear River, you can see its value in trade, its value in transportation, but also because that Cape Fear River, Chris, as you know, and people who are maybe not so familiar with the geography of North Carolina, that Cape Fear River comes in there and it runs all the way up through what is today modern day Fayetteville, up to where does it stop? Up near Raleigh somewhere, doesn't it? I mean, that's
Not very good with the geography on that
yeah,
one.
I mean, but it,
But yeah, it goes up and then it connects all the others rivers
yeah.
that are coming down to the mountain, connecting to the Cape Fear. Yeah.
So it's a great location for trade. It's a great location for transportation, and also if you're looking at it, and later, and of course, when we talk about Fort Anderson, we'll talk a little bit about Fort Fisher. These two forts are there basically at the mouth or near the entrance of the Cape Fear River, and that provides a level of protection from. From navies, from ships coming up the Cape Fear River and going into interior North Carolina. So it is an impressive location and is a good location for a town like Brunswick Town and later for a fort. Now, the first royal governor that stays here is Arthur Dobbs. And he is, interestingly enough, if you go to that site today, Chris, one of the main structures you're going to see is St. Philip's Church. Now, really, all's there today is just the walls, but there's graves around it. And what's fascinating is there are graves, I believe there are graves in it as well, like people who were buried in the church. So it's a fascinating location just to go there today and look at the graves of Arthur Dobbs, this royal governor, but also other people who were buried around the church, and to see the remains of St. Philip's Church as well.
And you mentioned the fact about Dobbs being a royal governor, which leads to the whole idea that he is British and that the British have come to take over Brunswick Town, to be in control of Brunswick Town. And, then you lead into the revolution that before the Revolutionary War takes place, you have this thing where the Parliament passes what's known as the Stamp Acts, which basically means that you've got to pay a tax on just about anything and everything that comes with it. A stamp has to be put on that to show that you've paid that tax. And the people in Brunswick Town are like, that's not what we're going to do. We're not exactly happy with that. And so, these ships come to Brunswick Town. saying, "Here's your stamps," and they basically refused to allow the stamps to come off the boat. And to the point where it is a violent resistance, and they begin to go and try to arrest the royal leaders, the royal governor, all of these people that are there. Dobbs is then transferred to Tryon. You mentioned the Tryon Palace a little earlier. Tryon is now the governor, if you will, and he's placed under house arrest. And what makes that interesting is that Brunswick Town is probably one of the first places where there is this violent resistance to British rule. And we don't think about Brunswick Town being that first place where it happens, which once again kind of goes to the point of why you wanted to select this history you didn't know but should, that maybe, just maybe, this place, Brunswick Town, becomes the catalyst for what starts the American Revolution.
Yeah, the British burn it. I mean, they burn it. Like you said, it's violent. They burn Russellboro, which by that particular point, William Tryon had renamed um uh Castle Tryon, which that gets to what you're talking about. Put your own name on it, dude. And he did. He put his own name on it. So he named it Castle Tryon. And then of course he leaves there and he goes up to
New Bern.
and builds Tryon Palace, putting his name on that as well. And that, of course, if our listeners are familiar with the regulators movement here in North Carolina, that sort of feeds into that. So because people are like, why is all this money being spent on this big palace um, out on the coast, and we've got other places that are in need of attention in other places throughout the colony. So at any rate, Chris, the Stamp Act plays an important role here, as you've talked about at Brunswick Town. Years, 8 years before the Boston Tea Party, you have conflict here in Brunswick Town over the issue of the Stamp Act. Next time, we'll of course get into the Civil War and talk about it. It's importance during that particular conflict. And of course, like I said, being along the Cape Fear, that's going to put it in the center of things.
And I think it's important. You mentioned that they burned the town and they burned Russellboro, but it's also potential that they burned the church that you mentioned, St. Philip's Church, that was burned. But what is fascinating to me is that they burn it, and then the leaders say, "Well, you didn't do a good job with it. Go burn it again." So it's actually burned twice. That's how much hatred was found towards these people because of what took place. And Brunswick Town starts to decline because, I mean, first of all, it's burned to the ground, but you start to see another development that starts taking place just a little bit up on that, and that's Wilmington, North Carolina. And so, bigger port, you've got more of the ocean and the Cape Fear. It's a little, it's a little more deeper, if you will. So a lot begins to happen where people begin to travel away from Brunswick Town, especially with everything that's starting to go on. And so I guess, and this is kind of fast forwarding it to today. We'll talk about the Civil War next time. But you can be confused nowadays because it's still called Brunswick Town, but really it's known nowadays more as Orton Plantation
Mhm.
because everybody left. And as everybody basically leaves, this guy that's basically stays around Brunswick Town, says, okay, well, let me just buy it. And so he actually buys it. And I believe he paid $4.25 to buy Brunswick Town. And it is now a very big plantation. I think they do like vineyard and grapes and all kinds of stuff. So very, very well known. But got paid less for Brunswick Town than you can for a cheeseburger today.
This is true. I never thought about that, but that is true. He, it cost him less money to buy Brunswick Town than it costs to buy lunch at McDonald's. Not that I eat at McDonald's, but it just costs more.
Well, let's go a step further. He paid less for the entire area that has beautiful longleaf pines than you can for one bale of pine straw today.
This is true.
But I bet he gets his pine straw for free.
Probably does. And he had other people dealing with the snakes and stuff. So
But it's just fascinating to see. And he called it Orton Plantation.
yeah.
Another smart man. So at the end of the day, Moore missed out on something. I don't know if he was trying to curry favor with King George. I don't know what he was doing, but imagine if it would have been called Moore County. That
Mhm.
would have been a problem.
But back then they had the ability to walk up on land, obtain the land, however they obtained it, and then just start a town. I mean, you have land over there where you live, and you don't have Carroll Town. It's not big enough, and you don't have Raytown over here where I live. It's not big enough. And also, I'm sure the towns we live in the county would probably object to that as well. But back then, you could just literally go up on some land and start your own town, and
Uh,
that.
you could, but you need to be careful because you can start your own town and people can burn it down, not once, but they can even come back and burn it down twice. So I'm
Yeah, and
perfectly happy not
if
to
I
happen.
started my own town, I guarantee you I would put my name on it somewhere.
So, but it's a fascinating history to it. And once again, it's one of those places, here we are during the summer. And if you're just looking for a quick excursion and say, hey, I'm going down to the beach, I'm going to go hang out, why not just make a quick stop into Orton Plantation or what's still known as Brunswick Town? And you'll be able to find a little bit of history you didn't know, but should. And then you can tell the people there, hey, I heard this from the podcast. Read
Yeah.
this.
And there's quite a bit to do. Wilmington's a great vacation place. You have the beach, you have Fort Fisher, you have the battleship, you have Fort Anderson, and you have all sorts of other attractions there in Wilmington today. So it's a great place to sort of get away. So anyway, I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify. Give us a like, give us a comment, and we'd appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Ray,
I'm Chris.
and we'll talk to you later.